Alex had always been a young man full of energy and determination. He lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, and stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things often inspired him. From a young age, he had a natural instinct to help those in need, especially the elderly, and he had developed a reputation as someone reliable, caring, and fearless. One day, Alex received a request that seemed both ordinary and impossible at the same time. His neighbor's mother, Mrs. Thompson, had been confined to her bed for months due to illness, her body weak and frail, and her spirit slowly fading. She had always been a lively woman, full of laughter and stories, but now she seemed trapped in a quiet, motionless world, and even the simplest tasks, like walking from one room to another, had become impossible for her. When Alex visited her, he found her lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, her eyes tired but hopeful. She greeted him with a weak smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can anyone really help me walk again?" she asked, and Alex looked at her without hesitation, feeling a spark of determination. He assured her that he could, that with care, patience, and the right effort, she would soon be able to stand and walk on her own. The story could have ended there as just another promise, but this time it was different, because unknown to Alex and Mrs. Thompson, their small, ordinary lives were about to intersect with someone who lived in a world completely different from theirs, someone rich, powerful, and skeptical about anything that seemed too optimistic or improbable. The millionaire had built his empire on logic, numbers, and results, and he never wasted his time on what he called foolish ideas. The millionaire lived just a few houses down, in a large, luxurious mansion that towered over the modest homes in the neighborhood. His presence was always felt, even when he was not around, because people whispered about his wealth, his eccentric habits, and the way he seemed to see through any act of deception. He had always thought of himself as a man who understood reality better than anyone else, and nothing ever surprised him, or so he believed. It was during one ordinary morning when Alex visited Mrs. Thompson that everything began. He had just explained a simple plan to help her regain strength through small exercises and daily care, and as he talked about washing, moving, and carefully assisting her, the millionaire happened to pass by, peeking through his ornate gate, curious about the unusual commotion in the neighborhood. When he overheard Alex say the words, "I'll clean your mom and she'll walk," he laughed loudly to himself, convinced that no one could ever achieve such a thing. Even as he laughed, Alex remained calm, his confidence unwavering. He had learned over the years that people who doubted him often underestimated the power of determination, and this time would be no different. Mrs. Thompson, sensing the millionaire's gaze and hearing the laughter, felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps for the first time in months, she looked at Alex and said, "Do you really think I can do this?" And he simply nodded, his eyes steady, filled with a quiet but unshakable certainty. Alex's approach was not just about physical strength, but about restoring belief and courage. He knew that Mrs. Thompson's mind had become as weak as her body, and that without hope, no amount of effort could make her walk again, so he spoke to her gently, encouraging her with stories, small jokes, and reminders of times when she had been strong. When she smiled at his words, her cheeks slightly flushed and eyes brightening, Alex felt a surge of motivation himself, knowing that the hardest part was not the cleaning, or the exercises, but the rebuilding of her spirit. Little did anyone know, this ordinary morning marked the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one where courage, belief, and human determination would clash with skepticism, doubt, and the cold calculations of the millionaire. What seemed like a simple act of care was about to become a story that would shock everyone who witnessed it. For Alex, it was never about proving someone wrong, it was about making a difference. But for the millionaire, this was about to challenge everything he thought he knew about possibility and human potential. And so, with a quiet determination, Alex prepared to start, his hands ready to help, his mind focused on the task. Mrs. Thompson watched him with a mixture of fear and hope, unsure of what the next steps would bring. The millionaire, amused and skeptical, leaned over the gate, certain that this would end in disappointment, and yet, without realizing it, he had already positioned himself to witness a moment he would never forget. Alex knew that the real challenge had only just begun. It was one thing to promise Mrs. Thompson that she could walk again, but it was another to actually make it happen. Her body had grown weak over months of inactivity, her muscles stiff and fragile, and even the simplest movement caused her discomfort. He understood that patience, skill, and encouragement would all be necessary, and that every small step would be a victory. The moment he explained his plan to Mrs. Thompson, she looked skeptical, her eyes filled with doubt. "Do you really think I can do it?" she asked softly, her voice trembling, and Alex smiled gently, knowing that doubt was natural. He reassured her, telling her that with consistency and care, her body would respond, that movement would become easier, and that her strength could slowly return. She hesitated for a moment, looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear, but something in his calm confidence made her believe, even if only a little. Alex's first step was simple but symbolic. He asked her to sit up in bed, and with gentle hands, he helped her shift her weight, careful not to strain her weak muscles. Each small motion was a test of her endurance, but also a lesson in trust. She had to trust him completely, and he had to trust her willingness to push forward. As she moved, Alex encouraged her softly, whispering words of motivation, reminding her of all the times she had overcome obstacles in her life. Meanwhile, the millionaire continued to watch from his mansion, his curiosity growing despite his initial amusement. He had never believed in anything so ordinary achieving something extraordinary, but something about Alex's determination caught his attention. There was a strange energy in the way Alex moved, a confidence in his hands and eyes that suggested he believed completely in the impossible. The millionaire shook his head, unwilling to admit it yet, but deep down, a tiny spark of doubt had begun to form. Alex then introduced small exercises disguised as daily chores, turning simple tasks into opportunities to strengthen Mrs. Thompson's body. He asked her to lift a light towel, to reach for a small basket, and to slowly move from the bed to a nearby chair. Every action was calculated, precise, and designed to rebuild her muscles without causing pain. Mrs. Thompson was hesitant at first, her movements shaky and uncertain, but Alex's constant guidance and gentle encouragement kept her going. Every time she stumbled, he was there to support her, reminding her that falling was part of the process, and that rising again was the real victory. Neighbors began to notice the unusual activity, whispering about the strange sight of Alex helping Mrs. Thompson move in ways that seemed impossible for someone her age and condition. They were curious, skeptical, and even a little amused, but Alex paid them no mind. He was focused entirely on the task at hand. On some level, he even wanted the skeptics to see the results, knowing that the power of action and determination could be more convincing than words. The millionaire, still observing, found himself unexpectedly invested in the progress. Each time Mrs. Thompson managed to hold herself upright for a few seconds longer, he felt a jolt of surprise, and each time she shifted her weight carefully, he unconsciously leaned closer, his laughter fading. Alex noticed this subtle change but didn't let it distract him. His attention was always on Mrs. Thompson, on building her courage as much as her strength. As the day progressed, Mrs. Thompson began to smile more, her confidence returning alongside her strength. What had seemed impossible only hours before now seemed within reach. The fear and doubt that had weighed on her melted gradually, replaced by a quiet determination. She began to trust her own body again, and more importantly, she began to trust Alex. That trust became the foundation for what was about to come, the real test of her abilities. Alex could see the moment approaching when Mrs. Thompson would attempt her first steps, and he prepared her mind as much as her body. He reminded her that each small effort mattered, that courage was just as important as strength, and that the journey itself was a victory. The millionaire, now fully attentive, could hardly believe what he was witnessing, and though he did not speak, his eyes reflected a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and something he had never expected, hope. And so, the challenge continued, each movement more daring than the last, each small success adding to the growing confidence of Mrs. Thompson. Alex's calm, patient guidance turned doubt into determination, skepticism into belief, and the impossible into a real possibility. Little did they know, the true shock, the moment that would freeze the millionaire in awe, was just around the corner, and the ordinary morning that had started with doubt was about to turn into a story no one would ever forget. Alex knew that before Mrs. Thompson could take her first real steps, careful preparation was essential. It was not just about physical strength, but about creating an environment where confidence could grow and fear could fade. He spent the early morning planning every detail, thinking through each small movement, every gesture, and every encouragement he would give. Preparation, he knew, was the bridge between doubt and success. He started by organizing the room, clearing the floors of any obstacles that could trip or frighten Mrs. Thompson. Even the smallest rug could become a hazard, so he carefully rolled them up and placed them aside. he moved furniture to create open space, making sure she would have a safe path to follow. His hands worked quickly and methodically, yet gently, almost as if the room itself understood that something extraordinary was about to happen. Next, Alex gathered the tools he would need to assist her, simple things like a sturdy chair for support, soft towels to cushion any missteps, and a small basket to turn practice into a game. He believed that even mundane objects could become instruments of progress if used creatively. Mrs. Thompson watched him with growing curiosity, her eyes wide with anticipation. She had never seen someone so focused, so determined, and somehow, that determination was contagious. As the room was prepared, Alex turned his attention to Mrs. Thompson herself. He explained each step of what they would do, breaking it down into tiny, manageable tasks. "We will start slow," he said, "just enough to challenge you but not enough to hurt or frighten you." He demonstrated the movements first, showing her how to lift her arms, shift her weight, and engage her legs. He even made a small game out of it, encouraging her to pretend they were practicing for a dance, turning effort into enjoyment. The millionaire, observing from his gate, watched with growing disbelief. He had expected to see clumsy attempts and immediate failure, yet what he saw instead was careful planning, precision, and patience. Something about Alex's methodical approach unsettled him, because it hinted that this might not end in failure after all. He crossed his arms, trying to maintain his skeptical facade, but deep down, a tiny spark of curiosity and doubt had ignited. Alex also prepared mentally, reminding himself that patience would be the key. He knew that Mrs. Thompson's confidence could falter at any moment, that one misstep or sudden fear could undo hours of progress. He practiced words of encouragement, imagining the moments when she would struggle, and preparing his voice to calm her fears. He even rehearsed subtle gestures, like holding her hand just long enough to support her, but not so long that she would feel dependent. Then came the most delicate part, preparing Mrs. Thompson's mind. He talked to her about courage, about trusting herself and her own strength, about believing in tiny victories rather than worrying about failure. He reminded her of times in her past when she had overcome difficulty, when she had surprised herself with what she could do. Slowly, her hesitation began to ease, replaced by a quiet determination that matched Alex's own. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light into the room, everything was finally ready. The floor was cleared, the tools were in place, and Mrs. Thompson's mind and body had been gently primed for action. Alex stepped back for a moment to look at the scene, a small smile on his face. He could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation, and he knew that the next steps would test not just her body, but her courage. Even the millionaire leaned forward slightly, his skepticism challenged by the careful preparation he observed. Alex had turned a simple room into a stage, a space where transformation could occur, and it was impossible for anyone watching to ignore the sense of purpose that radiated from him. The stage was set, the players ready, and the world outside seemed to pause for just a moment, waiting for what was about to unfold. Alex reached out, gently taking Mrs. Thompson's hand, looking into her eyes with a calm intensity. "Are you ready?" he asked, and she nodded, her grip firm, her face showing the smallest spark of confidence. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, the preparation, physical, mental, and emotional, had paid off. The next chapter of their journey was about to begin, and nothing could stop the determination that filled the room. The morning had grown warmer, sunlight spilling through the windows, and Alex knew it was time to begin the real work. He gently helped Mrs. Thompson stand beside the chair he had prepared, her hands gripping the sturdy frame for support. Her legs wobbled slightly, but he spoke to her calmly, encouraging her with every breath. "We will take it one step at a time," he said, and she nodded, trusting him completely. The first task was simple in appearance but significant in impact. Alex began by carefully washing Mrs. Thompson, not just to clean her body, but to awaken her senses. Every motion was slow and deliberate, each movement designed to stimulate circulation and flexibility. As he wiped her arms and shoulders, she could feel her body responding, small muscles she hadn't used in months beginning to remember their strength. He spoke to her softly, his voice steady. "Feel your arms. They're stronger than you think," and she smiled faintly, a small spark of confidence lighting her eyes. This was more than cleaning, it was a rehearsal for walking, a way to make her aware of her body's potential. The millionaire, still watching from his gate, raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. he had never imagined that something as ordinary as washing could be part of a plan to restore mobility. Alex continued, carefully moving down to her legs, lifting and supporting them as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Each movement was a subtle test, challenging her muscles without causing pain. "You're doing wonderfully," Alex encouraged, his hands steady on her back. "Every small step matters." The mother's grip on the chair tightened as she focused, her fear gradually giving way to determination. Even the simplest gestures, like helping her move her feet into position or gently massaging a stiff joint, became a small victory. Each moment was a reminder that progress could come from ordinary actions if performed with care and purpose. Alex had turned cleaning and movement into a therapy, a training, and a lesson in courage. Mrs. Thompson's eyes, once filled with doubt, now reflected a mix of hope and quiet pride. The millionaire, observing from his mansion, found himself leaning closer to the gate, unable to hide his curiosity. He had expected clumsiness, failure, or hesitation, but what he saw instead was a methodical, almost scientific approach to movement. Every gesture, every word, and every touch seemed to bring Mrs. Thompson closer to a breakthrough. He frowned slightly, a small part of him unsettled, because despite his disbelief, it was impossible to ignore the progress. Alex then made the cleaning process interactive, turning ordinary tasks into exercises. He asked Mrs. Thompson to reach for a towel, fold it, and place it on the nearby table. The action, simple in appearance, forced her to stretch, balance, and coordinate her movements. Each folded towel became a marker of achievement, a proof that her body was regaining strength, and with every successful attempt, her confidence grew. Even small missteps became lessons rather than failures. Alex helped her regain balance, adjusting her posture, guiding her movements, and praising her for every effort. "See? You're stronger than you thought," he said, and her smile widened. The millionaire, still watching, could no longer hide his fascination. He had always believed in outcomes only measurable by wealth or power, yet here was proof that dedication, patience, and careful planning could achieve the impossible. Hours passed, and what began as a simple cleaning routine had transformed into a full session of physical and emotional rehabilitation. Alex carefully guided Mrs. Thompson through each exercise disguised as chores, each moment strengthening her body and will. The room was filled with quiet determination, the kind that radiates when two people trust each other completely. And the ordinary afternoon had begun to feel extraordinary. Finally, as the day grew brighter, Alex stepped back slightly, observing her progress. She could stand for several moments without support, her movements less hesitant, and her expression filled with pride. The millionaire's eyes widened as he realized that the claim he had laughed at, "I'll clean your mom and she'll walk," was not just a statement, but a promise on the verge of being fulfilled. For Alex, the cleaning had never been the goal, but the first step in transforming fear into action, doubt into courage, and weakness into strength. And so, as the sun continued to shine, the first real signs of triumph began to appear. The cleaning, simple yet purposeful, had set the stage for the next challenge, walking, which would soon leave everyone, including the millionaire. The room had grown quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of movement and gentle encouragement. Alex stepped back slightly to observe Mrs. Thompson as she practiced the exercises he had designed. Her legs, once frail and unsteady, were beginning to respond to the repeated motions, and even the smallest bend of her knees felt like a triumph. Each shift of her weight was deliberate, careful, and filled with determination. At first, she had wobbled dangerously, gripping the chair as if it were her only anchor, but now she could rise for several seconds without support, and each attempt seemed easier than the last. Alex praised her gently after every success, his words carrying both reassurance and pride. "Look at that, you're doing amazing," he said, and a small smile lit her face. The sparkle in her eyes was a sign of hope returning, something that had been missing for months. The millionaire, watching from his gate, could hardly believe what he was seeing. At first, he had dismissed Alex's claim as nonsense, certain that no one could help a woman regain mobility through such simple means, yet here she was, her body slowly awakening, responding to patience, care, and determination. His lips parted slightly, a mixture of disbelief and fascination crossing his face. He had seen many impossible things in his life, but he had never witnessed ordinary people achieving the extraordinary in such a quiet, methodical way. Alex encouraged Mrs. Thompson to take small steps toward the open space he had cleared earlier, guiding her hands and offering gentle support. Each movement was measured, calculated, and purposeful, turning fear into confidence. Even when she stumbled, he steadied her without scolding or rushing, reminding her that mistakes were part of the process, and that courage was shown by continuing despite uncertainty. Slowly, she began to lift one foot and then the other, transferring her weight. Carefully, her movements growing more fluid with each attempt. The neighbors, drawn by curiosity, began to peek through windows and over fences, whispering in amazement. They had watched Mrs. Thompson struggle for months, and seeing her begin to move independently was almost unbelievable. Alex noticed their wide eyes but remained focused. He knew that their attention was less important than the progress she was making. Still, the growing audience added an unspoken tension, a sense that something remarkable was unfolding before their very eyes. For the first time, Mrs. Thompson's voice carried excitement, her tone a mixture of awe and disbelief. I think I can do this, she said, her hands shaking slightly but her posture straighter than before. Alex nodded encouragingly. Yes, you can, and you will, step by step, one at a time, he said, and she drew a deep breath, readying herself for the next movement. The small victories had started to build momentum, turning a simple exercise into a breakthrough. Even the millionaire, who had remained skeptical and distant, could no longer tear his eyes away. He saw her lift herself from the chair without gripping it as tightly as before, saw the tiny confidence growing in her eyes, and felt a strange tightening in his chest. He had laughed earlier at the audacity of Alex's claim, but now laughter was replaced with silent astonishment. His mind raced, trying to understand how something so improbable could be happening before him. Alex then increased the challenge slightly, encouraging Mrs. Thompson to take a few more steps while holding his hands lightly. The effort required concentration, courage, and trust, and she hesitated for just a moment, fear flickering in her eyes, but Alex spoke calmly, guiding her forward, reminding her of the strength she already had, and slowly, step by step, she began to move across the room, her balance improving with every attempt. The room seemed to hold its breath as she reached the middle of the space, standing taller, moving more steadily, and realizing that her body had begun to respond to her determination. Alex let her go for a second, letting her feel the power of her own strength, and the smile that spread across her face was radiant. Her progress was undeniable, and the impossible had begun to feel possible. The millionaire, frozen at the gate, watched every moment with wide eyes, his disbelief growing into awe. Alex had not only helped a frail woman regain movement, but had also transformed the very idea of what could be achieved with patience, care, and relentless determination. The first signs of progress were now impossible to ignore, and the anticipation of what was coming next, the moment she would walk entirely on her own, hung in the air like electricity. The room was filled with quiet tension, as if the air itself held its breath. Alex could feel the weight of the moment pressing gently on his shoulders. He had guided Mrs. Thompson through every step, every small motion, and now, after hours of effort, the time had come for her to take her first full steps on her own. He gave her a calm, reassuring smile, one that said, without words, "You are ready," and she nodded, gripping the edge of the chair just a little tighter. The millionaire, standing at the gate, had never felt such disbelief. He had thought Alex's claim was nothing more than a joke, a childish fantasy, yet here, he could see something extraordinary unfolding, something he had never expected in his life of logic, wealth, and certainty. The frail woman, who had seemed helpless only a few days ago, was about to defy every expectation, and the millionaire's mind raced, unable to comprehend how ordinary determination could create such an outcome. Alex guided Mrs. Thompson to the cleared floor, placing her hands lightly on his shoulders. He whispered encouragement in her ear, reminding her to trust her body, to feel the strength she had been rebuilding all this time. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear, excitement, and disbelief, but she took a deep breath and lifted one foot, then the other, stepping forward slowly, deliberately, as if learning to walk for the very first time. The first step was shaky, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Thompson wobbled, her knees trembling, but Alex's steady hands were there to catch her if needed. "You can do this, one step at a time," he said softly, and she repeated, in her mind, the words he had spoken for hours. Each small step became easier, her body remembering muscles long forgotten, her mind remembering courage long buried. Neighbors who had gathered quietly outside gasped softly as they witnessed the incredible scene. This was no longer just about cleaning or exercises, it was a transformation, a triumph of patience, belief, and determination. Mrs. Thompson's eyes shone with wonder at her own progress. She could hardly believe she was moving, yet with every step, the reality became undeniable, and her confidence grew. Alex began to step back slightly, letting her feel the power of her own strength. She lifted her feet higher, walked more steadily, and for the first time in months, she began to feel free. Her small, hesitant steps grew into longer strides, and the room seemed to pulse with energy, as if celebrating the moment with them. The millionaire's jaw dropped, his eyes widening in shock, his skepticism vanishing instantly. The millionaire had thought he had seen it all, yet nothing could have prepared him for this. He had laughed at Alex's bold statement, expecting failure, yet here was undeniable proof that persistence, skill, and belief could achieve the impossible. His hands gripped the gate tightly as he watched, frozen. Every step Mrs. Thompson took defying his expectations, every tiny movement she made felt monumental, and his mind raced to understand how ordinary courage could yield such extraordinary results. Mrs. Thompson, now halfway across the room, felt a surge of triumph. Her body, once weak and frail, seemed to remember its former strength. Her legs, arms, and core moved in harmony, guided by determination and Alex's unwavering support. The room, filled with sunlight, reflected her glow, and every step she took seemed to echo with victory. Alex's heart swelled with pride, not for himself, but for the woman who had rediscovered her strength. Finally, she reached the other side of the cleared space, standing tall and steady. Her breath came fast, but her smile was radiant. Her eyes sparkled with joy, disbelief, and pride. The millionaire, still frozen at the gate, finally found his voice. Unable to contain his astonishment, he whispered to himself, "Impossible, how could this happen?" And yet, the truth was undeniable. Alex had done what no one thought possible, and Mrs. Thompson had walked. In that moment, the ordinary room had become a stage for the extraordinary, and a simple act of care had transformed into a powerful story of courage and belief. The first full steps were not just movement, but a symbol of hope, determination, and the unstoppable human spirit. And the millionaire, once confident that nothing could surprise him, now understood that sometimes true miracles were found in the most unexpected places. The room was filled with a silence that was almost sacred, as if everyone present could sense the enormity of what had just happened. Mrs. Thompson stood at the far side of the space, her legs steady, her chest rising and falling with excitement. Alex remained close, his hands ready to support her if needed, but he knew the moment was hers. Every glance, every breath, carried the weight of triumph. Neighbors who had gathered quietly outside began to murmur in astonishment. Their whispers grew louder, filled with admiration and disbelief. "Did you see that?" one said, and another replied, "I can't believe it, she's actually walking." The small crowd that had once doubted Mrs. Thompson now looked at her with awe and inspiration. The ordinary had become extraordinary before their very eyes, and the story of courage and patience was spreading without a single word needing to be shouted. Mrs. Thompson herself could hardly believe what she had achieved. She felt the strength in her legs, the control in her movements, and the undeniable proof that determination and belief could overcome months of doubt and weakness. Her face glowed with pride, a mixture of relief and joy. As tears threatened to spill from her eyes, Alex smiled softly, knowing that every step, every careful movement, had led to this moment of empowerment. Even the millionaire, who had stood frozen at his gate for what felt like hours, could no longer contain his shock. His arms, which had been crossed tightly in skepticism, now hung loosely at his sides, and his jaw remained slack. He had thought he knew the limits of possibility, that the world was predictable and controllable, yet here was proof that ordinary people, with patience, care, and determination, could achieve miracles. The sight of Mrs. Thompson walking, something he had dismissed as impossible, forced him to reevaluate everything he had assumed about effort, belief, and courage. Alex turned to Mrs. Thompson, speaking softly, "You've done it, every step you've taken shows your strength, and I couldn't be prouder," he said, and she reached for his hands, holding them tightly, the warmth and gratitude in her eyes shining brighter than the morning sun. "I never thought I could walk again," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "but you believed in me, and now I can." The simplicity of her words carried the weight of a miracle, and everyone present felt it. The millionaire finally stepped closer, his footsteps hesitant, as if approaching a fragile truth. He looked at Alex with a mixture of awe, respect, and a hint of embarrassment. I thought you were joking, he admitted quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I never imagined it could happen. Alex nodded, smiling gently, understanding that belief was often the first step to change, and that sometimes, witnessing a miracle was the only way to truly understand it. Neighbors began to clap softly, then louder, their admiration spilling over. Words of praise, encouragement, and wonder filled the room and the surrounding yard. Mrs. Thompson, glowing with newfound confidence, waved to them, her smile radiant, as if the joy she felt inside could no longer be contained. It was a moment that united everyone in shared amazement, showing that courage, determination, and care could ripple outward, touching everyone who witnessed it. Alex took a step back, observing the scene, the gratitude and awe reflected in every face. He realized that the impact of their achievement extended far beyond the room. This was more than walking. It was a testament to what people could accomplish when belief, persistence, and care aligned. The ordinary woman had become extraordinary through patience and courage, and the once skeptical millionaire had been forced to confront a reality he had never anticipated. The millionaire shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face, a rare expression of humility and wonder. He had thought life was predictable, measured by wealth and status, yet he now understood that true value lay in courage, persistence, and human connection. Alex had not only helped Mrs. Thompson walk, but had also given the millionaire a lesson he would never forget. The transformation of one frail woman had become a story that challenged assumptions, inspired belief, and left everyone present forever changed. Mrs. Thompson took another few steps, this time without Alex holding her, and the applause grew louder. Her confidence radiated, her smile was unshakable, and her laughter, pure and joyful, filled the room and spilled out into the street. The millionaire watched silently, finally realizing that some miracles were not about money, power, or control, but about patience, care, and the quiet courage of ordinary people. And in that moment, the world seemed brighter, fuller, and infinitely more possible than it had ever seemed before. The room had transformed completely since the morning. What had started as a simple task of care and cleaning had grown into a moment of triumph that would not be forgotten. Mrs. Thompson stood in the center, steady on her feet, her eyes shining with pride, and her smile glowing with joy. Every step she had taken was a testament to courage, persistence, and the quiet power of belief. Alex stepped back slightly, his heart swelling with satisfaction, not for himself, but for the woman who had reclaimed her strength. He knew that this moment was about far more than walking. It was about showing that even the most impossible challenges could be overcome with patience, dedication, and a belief in possibility. He glanced at Mrs. Thompson, her laughter filling the room as she moved confidently, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The millionaire, still standing by the gate, finally allowed himself to step closer, a mixture of awe and humility on his face. He had been frozen in disbelief earlier, thinking such a transformation impossible, yet now he could see the undeniable truth. The frail woman who had once been confined to her bed had walked on her own, defying not only physical limitations but also the assumptions of everyone who had doubted her. Neighbors began to gather more openly, applauding and cheering, their faces filled with amazement and admiration. What had seemed like an ordinary day had turned into an extraordinary event that inspired everyone who witnessed it. The story of courage and determination was already spreading in whispers, with everyone marveling at how patience, care, and belief could accomplish what seemed impossible. Mrs. Thompson herself laughed lightly, a sound so full of relief and joy that it felt like sunshine in the room. Alex approached the millionaire, who looked at him with respect and a hint of humility. I was wrong to doubt you, he admitted, his voice low but sincere. I never imagined someone could achieve this with patience and care alone. Alex smiled gently, acknowledging the rare admission, understanding that this moment was as much a lesson for the millionaire as it was a victory for Mrs. Thompson. Sometimes, he thought, people need to witness courage and persistence to truly understand their power. Mrs. Thompson, filled with confidence, began to walk again and again across the room, each step more assured than the last. Alex guided her only when necessary, letting her feel the strength she had regained. Her transformation was complete, not just physically, but emotionally. The fear and doubt that had once weighed on her had vanished, replaced by pride, joy, and a renewed sense of independence. The millionaire, who had been a passive observer for so long, finally spoke louder, his voice filled with genuine admiration. This is extraordinary, he said, his eyes wide. I've never seen anything like it. For him, this was more than a lesson about human potential. It was a realization that courage, determination, and kindness could create miracles in ways money and power never could. He had come to witness a simple act of care, yet what he experienced was a transformation that shook his assumptions about life and possibility. Neighbors who had been skeptical before were now inspired, some wiping tears from their eyes, others shaking their heads in amazement. They understood that what they had seen was proof that even ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to give up. When Mrs. Thompson walked past them, her confidence radiating, she became a symbol of hope, showing that no matter the limitations, strength could be regained, and courage could overcome fear. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting warm golden light across the room, Alex and Mrs. Thompson stood together, triumphant. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Months of effort, determination, and trust had led to this single, unforgettable moment. The millionaire remained nearby, silently absorbing the lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. That miracles were not always grand or loud, but sometimes quiet, patient, and persistent. And so, the story ended not with fanfare, but with transformation, joy, and inspiration. Mrs. Thompson had walked again, Alex had fulfilled a promise that seemed impossible, and the millionaire had learned that human courage and care could defy expectations. The ordinary had become extraordinary, leaving everyone who witnessed it changed forever, and in that quiet, golden-lit room, hope, determination, and belief triumphed over doubt, leaving behind a story that would be remembered, shared, and cherished for years to come.